everyone. If everyone's ready to go, I'll hand over first to Minister Woods, who will give a little introduction to our energy policy, which we've obviously released today. But it is fair to say that what Tūrapaki are doing here with both ensuring the sustainability of their dairy processing, using geothermal for that, then using geothermal for hydrogen, really showcases the vision that we have for Aotearoa and New Zealand as a whole. So I'll have Minister Woods speak to that, then we would be happy to take questions both on the policy and any other issues of the day.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And as you say, being here with Tūrapaki today, I think is very fitting for us to announce an energy policy that is about looking to the future, and it is about a vision for the future, and it is about thinking about innovation, and it is thinking about how it is that we fit energy in the way in which we power our country within a sustainability framework. So really, the vision that we're seeing here today is something that we want to replicate, as the Prime Minister said, around the country. And I think it's quite fitting that Tūrapaki Trust were the first private power company to start generating power in the 1990s. We're going to see them as the first generator and producer of green hydrogen in the first quarter of next year. And this is what we want to celebrate and what we want to speed up the momentum around as a country. So today we are announcing that Labour will bring forward the 100% renewable electricity target from 2035 to 2030 with a check-in after the 2025 Independent Climate Commission's first budget in 2025. We're announcing another $70 million additional to the $30 million for the business case to progress the work around dry air storage. That is, we've already talked about Lake Onslow being a key contender there, but also a couple of other options in the North Island with pumped hydro. That this is New Zealand's battery, and this is what it will allow us to get to that 100% renewable target. We're also announcing more work around electrification of the transport and industrial sectors. Transport and industrial and process heat are some of the key areas where our climate change emissions are produced. And in terms of linking our energy policy very closely to our climate change ambition, it is about making sure that we're putting effort in energy and momentum into those areas. And we'll also have more money to invest in these emerging technologies like hydrogen that will allow us to have a sweep of different technologies to get to those decarbonisation targets and to become a world leader in renewable energy. And we'll also continue to make energy more affordable for New Zealanders. This is a package of policies that is about looking to our future, our climate policies, making sure our industry and businesses and households have access to affordable energy sources, and it's about the creation of jobs, using our decarbonisation pathway as a way to ensure that we have well-paid and sustainable jobs in this country. We're happy to take questions.
Thanks, Minister Woods. I think today's policy is a really exciting part of our plan to make sure that New Zealand is transitioning its economy for the future, that we are meeting our goals around climate change, but also demonstrating how we can be world leaders as we move towards a more sustainable economy. Very few countries around the world have been able to achieve a goal of 100% renewable electricity. New Zealand has the potential to be one of them. We want to do that by 2030. And there's a lot of potential that is unleashed, not just in jobs in the future by achieving that goal, but it is a key part of our branding. Moving to electric vehicles is one thing. Moving electric vehicles to a space where they are powered by renewable energy is a whole nother paradigm and opportunity for New Zealand as a whole. So that's what makes this policy so exciting. Happy to take questions.
So the Climate Commission recommended you prioritise electrification of transport and process heat over the 100% renewable electricity target. Why are you pursuing that target even more aggressively against advice from the Climate Commission?
Well, actually, I'd say that the opposite is true. They have said, yes, we need to focus on process heat. And you can see within this policy, we continue to prioritise that transition as well. And right here on this site, we have a dairy factory here operating using geothermal energy, so a good example of where that's been done. We want to incentivise more of that. But the Climate Commission also said that creating or investing in schemes like the one that Lake Onslow presents also is an opportunity for us to move into a space of having 100% renewable electricity generation. They themselves encourage that we explore that further, and we are.
Are you pursuing what's politically easy over what's best for the country?
I don't think anyone would ever say that the idea of creating 100% renewable electricity generation is easy. However, it presents the biggest opportunity for us to provide jobs that are designed for New Zealand's future and for a challenge that the whole world is facing. And that is making sure that we have a sustainable economy. So that is an exciting opportunity, one that I see the Climate Commission having encouraged, and it is not a replacement for also making sure that we are transitioning the corporate sector, those large users of energy, to transition to renewables as well.
Have you told the Climate Commission was the point they were making, that it would be an error for New Zealand and any government for its future to only pursue a 100% renewable target? What we're announcing today is an energy policy. It's not just about electricity generation. This is about how we move industrial and process heat and how we move transport into renewable sources. So this is precisely what the Independent Climate Commission was saying. The key unlocker to that is dry year storage, and that is why our government has made the bold decision to make sure that we are beginning that work, and Labour as a party is ensuring that we've got the resources there to progress and get momentum behind that project.
What about EVs? Have you dropped the ball on electric vehicles?
No, not at all. In fact, in pursuing electric vehicles, of course, one of the things we've recognised is that we need charging stations and a network across the country and also within the public sector to make it a reality. So first and foremost, that's where we've invested, building up that network across the country, building it up within the public sector, so we can then more efficiently roll out an EV plan.
But why didn't you do this in the last 3 years? Why didn't you do this in the last 3 years?
Well, we've invested heavily in making some of the significant transitions around renewable use, including supporting that within the private sector as well. This is the next stage in our plan. Keeping in mind, of course, at the start of our term, we were the government that said we were going to end any future offshore oil and gas exploration. We then invested in renewable energy research and development, and we've developed a hydrogen roadmap that presents such exciting opportunities for New Zealand. We're now starting to see the payoff from all of that work.
Is it just stolen from the grain?
One
Is
of
it
the
just stolen
critical
from the
things
grains?
that will stop people buying electric vehicles is lack of charging infrastructure. So one of the things that we've made significant progress on as a government is ensuring that we do have our state highways with drivable distances for electric vehicles. We've invested through ECA, through our low emission vehicle contestable fund, to ensure that we are getting that coverage. And we've been creative about how it is that we ensure we get that coverage with our private sector partners. I've opened EV charging stations in supermarket car parks in Queenstown to make sure that we're hitting the hotspots where people were and where we know EVs are. And that was a critical unblocker for the uptake of electric vehicles in New Zealand.
Yeah, is this just taken from the Greens?
No.
No?
In fact, particularly on the issue of dry use storage, that's something certainly that we've been pursuing and that we're investing in, and that will make a huge difference to New Zealand's future energy profile.
What if Onslow's not viable though? Is that going to be a problem?
Well, what we have to do is find a solution to New Zealand's dry year storage. So the way that we've set up the business case that we've already funded is to look at the issue of dry year storage. Onslow is obviously a key contender. There's also a couple of smaller scale pumped hydro schemes in the North Island, but then we'll have to look at some other technologies that sit beside that so that we can make both the environmental and the economic assessments of how they stack up against each other. So dry year storage is something New Zealand simply has to solve, and it is a nettle that we are willing to grasp as a party.
So is this policy contingent on Onslow or a similar scheme going ahead?
Well, not solely, obviously, as the Minister has said. We are investing in the business case around Onslow, but also looking at other pumped hydro schemes, some of which are at smaller scale.
Prime Minister, what about mining on conservation land? Because Forestry did say you've approved 150,000 hectares of conservation land for development since 2017, which includes coal on the Denniston Plateau.
The Minister of Energy Resources. One of the things though that we have been working through though, and has taken a little bit of time to work through, has been the difference between conservation and stewardship land. We have large amounts of land that are technically under stewardship land where these applications often apply, and that's been one of the things that as a government we've been trying to resolve.
And until that is resolved, the current policy settings stand. So that's why, under the current settings, some of those applications have been approved.
So why would there be a need for new coal mines?
Look, in terms of the current policy settings, it is issues in which we're continuing to work through. We've already got in the works the tranche 2 changes to the Crown Minerals Act, which is the legislation that governs that. We obviously made the first stage of reform to that act to bring about the end of the issuing of new exploration permits for oil and gas. But we're committed to a longer run piece of work around tranche 2 of the Crown Minerals Act, and one of the things that will consider is the purpose statement. And that will be a critical piece of work that we look to progress if we have the privilege of forming the next government.
Why haven't you prioritised that work sooner and changed those policy settings?
We made a commitment to the industry that we would work through the issues around the changes that were in there. Obviously, we made some very swift changes to put into effect. The decision we've made around ending oil and gas exploration, that would have been a piece of legislation that we would have progressed further this year if it had not been for COVID delays.
Prime Minister, can I ask, Victoria University is facing a $33 million loss in job cuts over the next year because of no international students. It wants students to be allowed in to complete quarantine at no cost, and complete quarantine, at no cost to taxpayers. Would you look at that as an option?
Of course, it's not just about cost. What we have to make sure is that we're maintaining public safety. And we have made a commitment to the international education sector that we will continue to work through potential opportunities there to accommodate some students. It is very clear though we won't be able to accommodate the very large number that New Zealand has had in the past, simply because of the constraints on being able to safely manage those coming through from the border.
But as the number of New Zealanders returning home presumably dwindles off, we'll be able to take more international students and perhaps waive some of those co-payments.
First cab off the rank will need to be those who have partners, for instance, family members, those who otherwise would usually be with their family had they not had those border restrictions. We have said we'll prioritise those individuals. And then there are those who will be ordinarily resident in New Zealand, and those who actually perform a really important role in New Zealand's economy. So we are working through prioritising those groups. We see international education in the mix there, but certainly it can't be the case that they take up every place that's available.
Prime Minister, the Greens say that they're prepared to sit on the crossbenches if they don't get what they want in coalition negotiations. Is that a concern for you?
Look, ultimately, in the aftermath of the election, we deal with what voters give us and what voters choose. I've made a habit, of course, in these last 2 elections of not engaging in negotiations during the campaign itself. Our job is to campaign on Labour policy. Theirs will be to campaign on Green policy. Voters will decide and then we make it work.
If they decide to play hardball on tax, though, would you, Labour, look to maybe change your stance on new taxes?
We've been very clear on our tax policy. And ultimately then it's up to voters to decide how they cast their vote in an MMP environment. Whichever way they move, then that's what we deal with in the aftermath.
Prime Minister, your energy policy says it's going to cost $4 billion. Where's that money coming from?
So that's for Lake Onslow. Of course, what we're working through at this stage is the business case for that proposed scheme. It also, as you can see, that's a projected figure. It would be a very long-term, significant infrastructure project creating thousands of jobs. But really, at this stage, it is about that early investment in the business plan to make a case and see whether or not that is the viable scheme that many believe it will be.
Prime Minister, you've both been on the campaign trail for a few days now. You've been given gifts. People have yelled out, "I love you." I think someone's even sung a song for you. Is this normal behaviour when you're out and about?
Well, it's obviously only my second campaign, so I've got only 2 elections to judge it off. And so it would really be for perhaps the more seasoned members of the gallery to determine that rather than me.
How tantalising is
the feedback on the trail? Is it all just
no, of course.
Like what?
Ultimately, an election, at any given time, there will always be people that disagree with you, and that's democracy. And I expect that on the campaign trail. I expect people will share their views, and that's what democracy is for. I'm not going to take the platform to highlight the moments when people have taken those positions.
Prime Minister, how tantalising is the prospect of Labour governing alone next term?
Be under no doubt, we will campaign hard, and we will campaign hard for a strong mandate for Labour, but at the same time, we will never be complacent. And that's why we will work very, very hard every day of this campaign, but I hope people will see we've worked very hard every day of government.
Single parties governing alone, is that good for democracy in an MMP environment?
It is a rare thing for New Zealand, and so we make no assumption that that's what will be delivered by any stretch. I think that would be a sign of complacency, and of which we have none.
And do you think it's time that we revisit the 2012 Electoral Commission review that talked about dropping the 5% threshold to 4%, getting rid of the coattailing clause?
Yeah, and look, that's something that Labour has had a position on, but there hasn't necessarily been the widespread support in Parliament to date around that. That'll be for a future government and actually for a future Parliament, given the need for there to be widespread support for such changes.
What commitments could you give as Labour leader if you are elected again to review the review, if you like?
Again, simply to maintain the position that we as a Labour Party already have, but actually for such significant changes, it is something that you do require widespread support, understandably, across Parliament.
Can you remind us what your position is on that?
We wanted to get rid of the coattailing provisions and therefore allow that drop in the threshold to match that.
Prime Minister, do you think National is trying to cheat to meet its debt target?
I have seen, of course, early on the National Party setting a debt target that from our perspective could only be achieved through significant cuts to services like health and education, because it is a significant drop in debt that they would want to achieve over a very short period of time. It is up to them to demonstrate how they would achieve that. What I've seen to date essentially is accounting changes that mean the debt figures would be the same, but they would just be accounted for in different ways. So I don't think that changes much of what New Zealand will have to face in the future. But for them to explain.
Is that tricky accounting then?
Well, look, as far as I can see, in order to achieve what is a very aggressive debt target, which otherwise would require, I think, cuts to health and education, they do seem to be engaging a form of tricky accounting.
Prime Minister, we've heard from more than 40 Weta Workshop and Weta Digital staff who say they've experienced or witnessed bullying, harassment or sexism at those companies. What's your reaction to the allegations, and should the government still be giving the Weta Group tens of millions in subsidies?
Well, first of all, I'd say it is up to every workplace, be it government agency or be it a private industry, to make sure that they maintain a workplace that is a safe, enjoyable place for people to work. And certainly some of the reports I've heard are pretty disturbing. And so I would expect, as I would anywhere else, for the leadership within that workplace to really tackle that head on. When it comes to government funding, that is a rebate scheme. Of course, it applies to a range of different sectors and operators within the screen industry. It provides a really crucial way of incentivising international production. But alongside that, we have a reputation as a nation to maintain. And I'd like to see that reflected in the way all workplaces operate.
Prime Minister, the alert level settings will be reviewed. The alert level settings will be reviewed in 4 days. Daily case numbers tracking how you'd like them to be?
What's key for us is not just the numbers, but of course the source and whether or not they still are connected and identifiable within the cluster we have in Auckland. As you'll know though, I never preempt those decisions. We do use the latest and most up-to-date data in order to make them, as does the Director General before he gives us his advice. So we'll be considering that in a few more days yet.
Do you share Germany's concern at the poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny?
Yes, and we have put out a statement on that. Our view is that there are significant questions to be answered by Russia, and we join in the international community expressing our concerns and also requesting that those questions be answered.
Would it be lamentable if New Zealand First and the Greens didn't make it back into Parliament next term?
My view is that New Zealand is well served by having the range of smaller parties that we do in Parliament. And so that's my view, and I'm sure that would be the view of many New Zealanders. That doesn't change my role, of course, in campaigning hard for Labour as well.
And on Donald Trump, he's saying he wanted to play down COVID-19. When is it okay for a leader to lie?
Well, I can only speak for the responsibility, of course, that we have as leaders here in New Zealand, and the way that we've dealt with the information and evidence we've had presented to us. And I do think it's important to make sure that we always express the seriousness of a situation we're facing, whilst also clearly giving people a sense of calm because of the plan that you have, regardless of how risky or threatening the pandemic is and has been.
Prime Minister, would you be prepared?
Any of those tapes between the President and Bob Woodward, or any of the transcripts?
I've
about him?
seen some of the international reporting around them.
Were you shocked?
Again, for me, it's all about what we do in response to the information we've had. I am, just like you, an observer of what's happening globally, but we need to be accountable for our own response here in New Zealand.
Prime Minister, would Cabinet be prepared to overrule Ashley Bloomfield in order to get the Rugby Championship here, rather than see it go to Australia? I mean, how far would you go?
I don't think that that's a necessary really question, as it were, because our firm view is that we need to make sure that with any question of economic development that we might be facing, there's a number of different versions of that, whether it's sports or other fields, we have a responsibility to keep New Zealand safe. And there are ways that we can do that whilst also grabbing a few international opportunities as well.
How is
Prime Minister, Judith Collins said yesterday if National was elected she would hold a royal commission into the White Island disaster. Would you do the same, or would you reconsider?
I was asked this question yesterday while I was in Whakatane, and the point that I made is that we do have the work safe work, and obviously coroners play such an important role in such investigations in New Zealand as well. Our view is we need to allow that work to be complete. We do run the risk otherwise of setting up an inquiry that would duplicate the work that's already underway.
I was going to ask how dinner at the Golden Kiwi was last night.
As excellent as it always is, and just as I remember it.
What will you miss most about Morrisonville and moving back to Auckland?
Family. Yep. My family have lived there since the late 1980s. Actually earlier if you factor in my grandparents, but the great thing about home is that it very rarely changes.
Winston Peterson's getting a bit of grief on the campaign. Thank you. Winston Peterson's getting a bit of grief on the campaign trail about not being enough of a handbrake on you. Does that compute?
Oh, again, that sounds like more of a question for a coalition partner than it would be for me. I've always said throughout this term that, in my view, despite being a government of three very different parties, we've done a good job of forming consensus and delivering significant change, and that ultimately is what New Zealand asked of us.
James Shaw said that was extreme and chaotic in government.
And again, as I've said, I'll actually stand very proudly on our record as a government.
In your capacity in your capacity as Arts Minister, are you going to be making any announcements over the course of this campaign, or are we not really going to see a Labour arts policy come out?
Well, actually, yes, you will. But one thing I will point to is that the investment in the arts as a part of our COVID recovery and response packages has been significant. We have an innovation fund. We have the rollout again and the reinvigoration of that old PACE scheme. We have the Cultural Arts Recovery and Employment Fund, which is tens of millions of dollars. We have the Domestic Touring Fund, support for venues, and the Museum Hardship Fund. Now, all of those in their totality do represent tens of millions invested just in recent months into the sector. So our focus is rolling out that support for the industry, and that will help for years to come.
What about with each new lockdown, though, if they keep happening?
Yeah, and that's what these funds are designed around. So the Innovation and Capability Fund, for instance, to support new initiatives that might help, for instance, with digital technology to improve access to some of our collections and some of our artists. The Touring Fund is based around how can we take tours of different sizes into the regions and overcome some of those high and prohibitive costs for touring, but to support artists who otherwise might usually play larger venues. The Venues Fund likewise is seen as a bridging. So all of them have been designed to deal with the potential of us moving in and out of different levels. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.